Previously we saw, Serena has already lived 3 miserable lives. In her second life, she was reborn as Serena Lavernia, the villainess of a tragic romance novel destined for a horrible ending. Trying to escape that fate, she ran away to a convent. But a carriage accident ended her life once again. And when she opened her eyes, she found herself back in the same story. Now hated by everyone and facing a divorce from the Duke, Serena realizes one thing: her nightmare is far from over. Now we see when Serena's final words echoed endlessly in the Duke's mind, that he was free to date anyone he wished. He could not understand how she could say something like that so casually. His thoughts drifted back to their academy days, back when Serena had been fiercely possessive. In those days, she always kept a watchful eye on him. Any woman who approached him risked facing her anger. She would confront them directly, demanding how anyone dared to look at another woman's fiancé. Sometimes the arguments became loud, almost like battles, as if she were defending something precious. One memory stood out clearly. A young woman had once brushed a speck of dust off his clothes. She immediately tried to explain it had only been a simple act of kindness. But Serena had exploded with anger. The Duke tried to calm her. He told her it really was nothing serious. Perhaps she was being too harsh. But Serena refused to listen. She even told him to stay out of it. No one had the right to touch him. Eventually, the result was obvious. People stopped showing interest in him entirely. Not because they lacked curiosity, but because they were afraid of Serena. And yet, the strangest part of all, after pushing every woman away from him, Serena herself began chasing the crown prince. The contradiction left a bitter taste in his mouth. So hearing her suddenly say he could date freely felt completely absurd. He could not stop thinking about it. Meanwhile, Serena rested comfortably in her chamber. Her thoughts were far more peaceful. To her, the situation was not a bad start. The reflection period had begun, and the alimony had not yet been delivered. But it was only a matter of time. Soon she would be able to leave the Lavernia name behind. And once she escaped, she would finally move further away from the original story. Her thoughts turned toward practical matters. How would she earn money? As she considered this, she remembered something. Pamel's hair had seemed thinner than before. Perhaps he was experiencing hair loss. Treatments for that problem barely existed in this world. But she knew something others did not. She could make one herself. Among nobles, such remedies would be extremely popular and extremely profitable. While thinking about this, Serena noticed something strange. A bunny doll was sitting quietly on a chair in her room. She frowned. Had that always been there? Slowly, she approached it. An uneasy sense of familiarity crept into her mind. Then a memory surfaced. Just before the carriage accident, she had seen a doll like this, right before losing consciousness. Her unease deepened. Why would something like that suddenly appear here? Instinct told her this object meant trouble. So without hesitation, Serena picked up the doll. Then she walked to the window and threw it outside. Immediately, she felt a sense of relief. She lay down on her bed again, feeling slightly better. Until she completely escaped the original story, she planned to focus on her own goals. For now, all she wanted was rest. But it seemed the bunny doll had other plans. The next morning, while Serena was still sleeping, the doll appeared again and began trying to wake her. She tried to ignore it, but the persistent noise eventually dragged her half awake. When she opened her eyes and saw the doll again, disbelief filled her face. She clearly remembered throwing it away. Yet here it was. Once again, she grabbed it by its long ears, then stared at it suspiciously. The doll suddenly opened a small book. Words appeared on its pages. Congratulations. It declared that she had been chosen by the World Tree. Serena blinked in confusion. Nothing like this existed in the original story. She immediately dismissed the claim. She refused to believe such ridiculous nonsense. But the doll insisted she should at least listen. Reluctantly, she agreed. Then the doll explained. It was the spirit of the World Tree, and it had been searching for an outsider, someone destined to save this world. Serena quickly summarized the meaning in her mind. As an outsider, she had been chosen, but her thoughts rejected the idea instantly. Saving the world was the saint's role, not hers. If the spirit had come to her, then it clearly made a mistake. Inside her heart, she had absolutely no intention of working for world peace, or sacrificing her comfort for others. What she wanted was something much simpler: peaceful life, a massive and steady income, money flowing endlessly, while she relaxed in comfort. That was her true dream. Still, the doll continued pleading. It said she was the only outsider, the only one capable of completing the mission, and if she succeeded, she would be allowed to return to her original world. Serena's expression instantly froze. Return? To that miserable life? Anger surged inside her chest. She warned the doll never to mention such a possibility again. In this world, even if she remained the villain, she could live quietly. To her, the world simply was not worth saving. But the doll refused to give up. It insisted the world now faced a far greater danger than before, and if she saved it, she would be granted one wish, anything she desired, even if she did not want to return to her original world. Serena paused. Her thoughts shifted slightly. She already had plans to build a peaceful life through herbal medicine. But suddenly, another feeling rose from deep inside her heart: revenge. Two names immediately surfaced in her mind: Kim Kyolsu, the man who worked her to death, and Lamelin, the one who treated her like a disposable experiment. Hatred burned quietly inside her. She turned back toward the doll. Then she asked a question. Was it possible to bring someone from another dimension? The doll hesitated, then nodded. The World Tree's power could grant that wish. Serena pressed further. How many people could be brought? The doll thought carefully, then answered. It would be difficult, but 2 people could be summoned. Hearing that answer, Serena suddenly felt excited. Relief spread across her face. The doll misunderstood immediately. It assumed she wanted to bring someone dear to her. It even commented that despite her harsh personality, she must have a warm heart. Serena simply smiled. A cold smile. Then she asked the doll for one more thing: proper contract. Something that would formally bind their agreement. The doll agreed without hesitation. It handed her a sheet of parchment. Serena calmly began writing. 2 names appeared on the page. The names she had never forgotten. As she finished writing them, a quiet promise formed in her mind. Everything they had done to her would be repaid. A low laugh escaped her lips. The sound made the doll shiver. For the first time, it began to wonder. Had it made a terrible mistake choosing her? The small bunny spirit began explaining the contract to Serena. Its voice carried a strange mix of gentleness and authority. The project, it said, was to save the world. But it would not be simple. Several conditions were attached to the contract. The first condition was clear. The contractor must fight the evil threatening the sacred world tree. She would need to work alongside the spirit and actively participate in the battle to protect it. The second condition was more enticing. If the project succeeded, the spirit of the world tree would grant the contractor a blessing, a power capable of changing her destiny forever. Then came the final condition. If the project failed, the contract would disappear entirely. Everything they had done would simply vanish. The bunny tried to reassure her. It promised that it would remain by her side, offering guidance and strength whenever her will began to falter. Then it declared something even more surprising. Serena had permission to form a direct contract with the very source of the world itself. As those words were spoken, the bunny slowly floated into the air. The small body began glowing. A brilliant light spread through the room. Serena instinctively shielded her eyes. The light was far too bright. Inside her mind, she wondered how something so small could produce such overwhelming radiance. The bunny spoke again. Before the contract could be completed, she needed to give it a name. Without that, the contract could not be finalized. Serena blinked in confusion. She had to name it too? That seemed unnecessary. Still, she began thinking. The first name that came to her mind was Cammy. The bunny immediately rejected it. Its voice carried clear disapproval. Was she really choosing such a careless name for something tied to an eternal contract? Once a name was chosen, it could never be changed. Serena stubbornly defended her choice. She insisted the name sounded cute, but every suggestion she made was rejected. Her irritation quickly grew. Why were none of her ideas acceptable? Finally, with a long sigh, she muttered another name. Nix. This time, the bunny's reaction changed completely. It brightened immediately. The spirit accepted the name without hesitation. From that moment forward, it proudly declared its name would be Nix. Serena stared at the small creature. Her thoughts felt strangely muddled. It still looked like nothing more than a doll. Yet somehow, she could have sworn it had just smiled. Nyx then spoke solemnly. From this day onward, he would serve as her knight and her strength. He promised to stand firmly by her side, and he looked forward to working with her. Serena blinked in surprise. His tone sounded completely different now. Took her a moment to realize something. Earlier, Nyx had likely been speaking on behalf of the World Tree. That was why his words sounded so formal. Now he was speaking as himself. She quickly shook her head. There was no need for such stiff behavior. She asked him to speak more casually, and instead of calling her master, he could simply call her Serena. Nyx hesitated. He admitted that such a relationship felt unfamiliar. He had never worked this way before. Serena smiled faintly. They were not master and servant. They were partners. Two people working toward the same goal. Saving the world. Hearing those words seemed to move Nyx deeply. He suddenly floated closer and hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, Serena quietly reflected on something. Friendship always made cooperation easier. Much easier than strict hierarchies. Nyx soon regained his enthusiasm. With excitement, he announced that he would now explain how they were going to save the world. But before he could continue, Serena raised a hand. She had one suggestion first. A week later, the Duke sat in his study. Papers were scattered across his desk. But his mind was not on his work. It had already been a week since Serena returned to the mansion, and something about the atmosphere felt wrong. The mansion had grown strangely quiet. From the side of the room, Pamela asked politely if the Duke would like the windows opened. The Duke waved the idea away. But then he voiced the thought that had been bothering him. What if Serena had fallen seriously ill? Or worse, Pamela immediately dismissed the possibility. He assured the Duke that Serena had simply been staying in her room, handling everything by herself. But the Duke frowned. This behavior was nothing like the Serena he remembered. She used to attend 4 or 5 extravagant outings every week. Sometimes she even forced her way into gatherings where she had not been invited. Compared to that chaos, this silence felt unnatural. Pamela smiled faintly. Even he admitted that her behavior was unusual. The Duke leaned back in his chair. Lately, Serena's face had looked different. The twisted expressions filled with schemes and malice were gone. Instead, her face seemed calm, almost peaceful, as if the weight of countless regrets had suddenly disappeared. And strangely enough, that reminded him of the day of the carriage accident. Memories resurfaced. Back when Serena's eyes held warmth. Back when she only looked at him. The Duke abruptly shook his head, annoyed with himself. What kind of nonsense was he thinking? Pamela quietly suggested something. If the Duke was truly curious, perhaps he should simply check on her himself. The Duke scoffed immediately. He was not worried about her. Not at all. He only wanted to know what trouble she was planning this time. That was the only reason. With that excuse firmly in mind, he stood up, then walked straight toward Serena's chambers. Meanwhile, Serena lay sprawled across her bed, completely comfortable. He finally asked the obvious question. Was it really okay for her to remain this idle? Serena answered without hesitation. In another life, she had lived almost like a slave. Her freedom had been suffocated. So before saving the world, she needed rest, time to gather her strength. But deep inside her mind, another thought whispered. Even if the task involved saving the world, her personal dream was far simpler. She wanted a comfortable life. If the villainous Serena simply did nothing, then nothing terrible would happen. No one would interfere with her, and she would not need to worry about anything. If that peaceful life could last forever, that would be perfect. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted. Someone knocked on the door. Serena frowned. Who dared disturb her? The servants were usually far too afraid to knock. Without even looking at the door, she spoke lazily. Just leave the food outside. She would handle it herself. But the person outside was no servant. The Duke pushed the door open and entered. He immediately walked to the windows, then pulled the curtains wide open. Sunlight flooded the room. Serena felt irritation rise instantly. One advantage of being the feared villainess was that no one dared bother her. She turned toward the intruder angrily. Who allowed someone to enter the Duchess's room without permission? Then she froze. It was the Duke. The Duke slowly looked around the room, his expression filled with disgust. He commented that the room had turned into a pigsty. Serena shot back immediately. Everything was perfectly fine. She knew exactly where everything was. But as his words echoed in her mind, her temper flared. Was he calling her a pig? Before she could react further, the Duke stepped forward. Without warning, he lifted her into his arms. Serena's eyes widened in shock. What exactly did he think he was doing? Ignoring her protests, the Duke raised his voice. He called for a maid immediately. When the maid arrived, he gave a strict order. Clean the room. Restore it to its original spotless condition. Under the strict command of Magnus, the servants had been ordered to clean Serena's room for nearly 10 minutes. Serena watched silently, her thoughts drifting as she observed the transformation. What had once been her precious sanctuary, dark, dusty, yet warm and comfortable, was now turning into a bright, polished chamber with an atmosphere that felt painfully stiff and unwelcoming. The little corner that had once been perfect for lazing around was completely gone. In its place stood a spotless space that seemed to demand discipline and order. Just looking at it made Serena feel strangely overwhelmed, as if simply existing in the room now required effort. The charm she had once loved had completely disappeared. Earlier, Magnus, the Duke, had remarked that calling her a pig might have been too harsh. Yet the words that followed were even more cutting. In fact, he had bluntly declared that pigs were far better than her. He even questioned how lazy someone had to be for their face to become that round in only a single week. Serena's chest tightened with anger at his harsh tone. Within her heart, she silently admitted that the gratitude she once felt toward him was slowly disappearing. Still, she reminded herself of something important. Magnus had always been a man of strict principles. From the very beginning, his personality had been shaped by discipline. Patience, she knew, was necessary. After all, he was still the one providing her with food and shelter. Taking a slow breath, Serena tried to calm herself. Then a thought suddenly crossed her mind. She pointed out that the Duke had never once visited the annex before. So why had he suddenly come today? Surely there had to be a reason. Magnus immediately replied with a sharp tone. According to him, the annex had been far too quiet lately, so he came to check what kind of trouble she was causing. But what greeted his eyes was nothing short of a disaster, because she had turned the entire room into a pigsty. With hesitant honesty, Serena admitted that perhaps she had gone a little too far in neglecting the room. But she quickly added that she had planned to clean it eventually. She also explained something else. Once she left this place, the room would surely be redecorated for the next Duchess anyway. So in the grand scheme of things, her neglect was rather meaningless. She promised that she would be more careful from now on. However, she also made a small request. No matter what she did, she hoped he would simply ignore it. Deep down, she already knew that Magnus would never actually do that, but saying it out loud still felt better. The truth was simple. She preferred being alone. Relying on others felt pointless, and detachment was far easier. But Magnus clearly had no intention of agreeing. He firmly declared that he could not ignore the matter. Since the house belonged to him, he could not allow it to be turned into a pigsty. His blunt words immediately silenced Serena, and in that moment, she couldn't help but think something bitter. It was never her well-being that he cared about, only the reputation of his household. Moments later, Magnus' eyes slowly drifted toward her clothes. He realized that earlier, he had been too distracted to notice what she was wearing. Her outfit was simple, but it immediately caught his attention. Serena casually replied that they were just pajamas, and since she was inside her own room, she could wear whatever she wanted. However, Magnus pointed out something unexpected. Being dressed like that while alone in a room with a man was rather inappropriate. Serena looked genuinely confused. What man was he even talking about? They were not that kind of couple. But Magnus calmly reminded her of one undeniable fact. Regardless of how they felt, they were still married. But something about Serena's sudden indifference was starting to bother Magnus more than he expected. And while Magnus is still trying to understand what changed, Serena is already preparing for her next move. A move that will soon bring her face to face with the people she tried to leave behind. What happens next continues in part 3. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.